The leather-bound album felt heavy in Eleanor Vance's hands, not from its physical weight, but from the 5 decades of memories it represented. Today was her golden anniversary. 50 years married to Robert Vance. The thought filled her with a warm, settled pride that radiated from her very core. She traced a finger over a faded photograph of their wedding day, her in a simple but elegant white dress, him dashing in his crisp military uniform, his smile wide and promising. They looked so young, so blissfully unaware of the challenges and joys that lay ahead. To mark the occasion, she had decided to get a replacement for their original marriage certificate. The cherished document was now yellowed, its edges soft and frayed from a lifetime of being carefully stored, then occasionally retrieved to be marveled at. She wanted a pristine official copy to frame and hang alongside their wedding photo. It was a sentimental gesture, a reaffirmation of the life they had built together. The county clerk's office was a study in bureaucratic efficiency, fluorescent lights humming overhead, the scent of paper and toner hanging in the air, the quiet click-clack of keyboards providing a monotonous soundtrack. Eleanor took a numbered ticket and waited, the fragile certificate held gently in her lap. She felt a small, silly thrill of anticipation, like she was about to receive a new copy of their love itself. When her number was called, she approached the counter where a young man with earnest eyes and wire-rimmed spectacles sat. He offered her a polite, professional smile. "How can I help you today, ma'am?" he asked. "I'd like to request a certified replacement copy of my marriage certificate, please," Eleanor said, her voice warm. She slid the old document through the slot in the glass partition. "It's our 50th anniversary today." "Oh, congratulations," the clerk said, his smile becoming more genuine. "That's a wonderful milestone." He took the paper with careful hands, appreciating its age. "Let's get you a nice new one to celebrate." He began typing, his eyes flicking between the old certificate and his computer screen. His efficient tapping slowed. Then it stopped. A faint line appeared between his brows. He typed a few more commands, his frown deepening into a look of profound confusion. He looked at the certificate, then back at the screen, then back at the certificate. Eleanor's pleasant anticipation began to curdle into a trickle of unease. "Is everything all right?" she asked. The clerk looked up, his expression a mixture of apology and bewilderment. "I'm sorry, ma'am, I must be having a system error today. Could you please confirm the names and the date of the marriage for me again?" "Of course," Eleanor said, a nervous laugh escaping her. "Robert Michael Vance and Eleanor Rose Gallagher. September 14, 1973. He typed again, his movements now hesitant. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the hum of the lights. Finally, he looked up, and the look in his eyes made the bottom drop out of Eleanor's stomach. It was pure, unadulterated pity. "Mrs. Vance. I don't know how to say this," he stammered, his voice low. "But this document, it's not in our system. In fact, according to our official records, a marriage between these two parties on this date was never registered." Eleanor stared at him, certain she had misheard. The words seemed to bounce off her, refusing to make sense. "That's impossible," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. "There must be a mistake. Spelling error, perhaps? Please check again. Robert Vance. Vinky." The clerk, looking deeply uncomfortable, did so. He scanned the document again, comparing the seal, the signatures. "The document itself is a very sophisticated forgery, ma'am. The paper is aged appropriately, the typography is nearly perfect for the era. But it's not genuine. I'm so sorry." The world seemed to narrow, the periphery of her vision darkening. The hum of the lights became a deafening roar in her ears. Forgery. The word echoed in her mind, ugly and impossible. This paper was her history. It was the foundation of her entire adult life. But we are married," she insisted, her voice trembling now. "We've built a life together. We have a son. Please just look up Robert Vance. You'll see he's married." Seeing her distress, the clerk typed again, a desperate attempt to find some thread of truth to offer her. His eyes widened slightly. "Robert Michael Vance is in the system," he said, and a fractured sliver of hope pierced her confusion. "You see, I told you." "However," he interrupted gently, his voice filled with dread for what he had to say next, "the registry lists his legal spouse as Clara Finch." The name hit Eleanor with the force of a physical blow. The air left her lungs in a painful rush. Clara Finch. Robert's widowed sister-in-law. A vague, melancholic figure who had drifted in and out of their lives for years. A woman whose husband, Robert's brother, had died tragically young. Clara, the army nurse, always moving, never settling, her existence a quiet footnote in their family history. Now, according to this cold, official record, she wasn't a footnote. She was the main text. "No," Eleanor whispered, the word a breathless denial. "No, that can't be." She stumbled back from the counter, the young clerk's apologetic words fading into a meaningless buzz. She clutched the forged certificate, her knuckles white. The paper felt toxic in her hands, a lie she had cherished for half a century. She pushed through the heavy glass doors and out into the blinding sunlight, the world tilting on its axis. 50 years. A home built, a child raised, holidays celebrated, illnesses nursed, a lifetime of shared sunsets and whispered secrets. All of it every single day, built upon a foundation of sand. The man she loved, the life she lived, the very identity she held as a wife. It was all a meticulously constructed illusion. She didn't remember the drive home. Her body operated on autopilot, navigating familiar streets that now seemed alien and menacing. She pulled into the driveway of the beautiful colonial house they had bought together 30 years ago. The garden she tended with love, the porch swing where they drank coffee on Sunday mornings. It all felt like a movie set, a beautiful facade with nothing real behind it. She found Robert in his study, surrounded by the artifacts of their life together. Framed photos of their son Jonathan from infancy to graduation. A shelf of books they had read to each other. He looked up from his newspaper, his smile warm and familiar. "There you are, my love. I was wondering where you'd gotten to on our big day. Planning a surprise for me?" His eyes twinkled. He looked exactly like the man she had loved for 50 years. But was he? Who was he really? Wordlessly, her hand shaking so violently she could barely control it, she held out the marriage certificate. The words wouldn't come. They were stuck in her throat, a choking lump of betrayal and despair. Robert's smile faltered as he took the paper. He glanced at it, then back at her face, and in that infinitesimal moment Eleanor saw it. There was no confusion, no shock, no outraged denial. Instead, a veil descended over his eyes. The warmth drained away, replaced by a weary, chilling calm. He knew. He had always known. "Eleanor," he began, his voice carefully neutral. "The county clerk," she interrupted, her voice a raw, broken thing. He said this is a fake. He said you're not married to me." The words sounded insane even to her own ears. "He said your legal wife is Clara Finch." She searched his face for any sign that this was a monstrous error, an administrative nightmare that they would laugh about later. But his expression remained placid, unnervingly resigned. The silence that stretched between them was more devastating than any outburst could have been. "Haven't I been a good wife to you, Robert?" she pleaded, her voice trembling uncontrollably. "Haven't I stood by you, loved you, built a life with you? What is this? Please tell me it's not true." He looked at her then, not with love or remorse, but with an indifference so profound it froze the blood in her veins. It was the look one might give a stranger who had asked an inconvenient question. "Clara," he said, her name a soft, definitive statement on his lips, "is my true love. I only ever wanted to build a life and a family with her." The simple, cold declaration shattered what was left of Eleanor's world. She collapsed into the armchair opposite him, her legs unable to support her. 50 years. Reduced to ash by a single sentence. The study, once a sanctuary filled with the comforting scent of old books and Robert's pipe tobacco, now felt like a tomb. The air was thick and suffocating, heavy with the weight of a 50-year deception. Eleanor sat in the velvet armchair, her body numb, her mind reeling. She stared at Robert, but she no longer saw the husband she loved. She saw a stranger, a man capable of a lie so vast and sustained it was beyond comprehension. "How?" was the only word she could force out, a whisper scraped raw. "How could you? For 50 years, Robert? 50 years." Robert sighed, a sound of irritation rather than remorse. He placed the forged certificate neatly on his desk, as if tidying up a minor inconvenience. "It was necessary," he said, his voice flat, devoid of the emotional resonance that had always defined him for her. "My parents would never have accepted Clara. Her background was unsuitable. And then my brother married her. It was a mess. Your brother married her, Eleanor repeated, the horror dawning anew. So she was your sister-in-law. And you what? You loved her all along? Even then? Always, he said, and for the first time, a flicker of genuine emotion crossed his face. A fervent, possessive light in his eyes that had never been there for her. It was always Clara. My brother's death. It was a tragedy, but it also freed her. We could finally be together. But you married me. Eleanor cried, the injustice of it lashing out. You stood in a church and you vowed to love and cherish me. Was that all just a performance? We needed a cover, he explained, as if it were the most logical thing in the world. A respectable front. I was rising through the military ranks. A stable, traditional marriage was expected. You were perfect for that. Educated, presentable, from a good family. And you loved me. It made it easy. Easy. The word was a dagger to her heart. Her love, her devotion had made his deception easy. And Clara? Eleanor asked, her voice hollow. She agreed to this? To live in the shadows as your, what? Your secret mistress? While I played the fool as your public wife. Clara understood the sacrifices required, Robert said, a defensive edge entering his tone. Her work as an army nurse kept her mobile. It provided the perfect excuse for her constant comings and goings. She was never far. Eleanor's mind raced, connecting dots she had never thought to connect. Clara's visits, always timed with Robert's leaves. Her lingering looks, her proprietary air that Eleanor had mistaken for familial closeness. The times Robert would be called away on urgent business, that somehow coincided with Clara's postings. They had been living a whole other life right under her nose, and she, the educated fool, had seen nothing. The front door opened and closed, and the familiar sound of their son Jonathan's footsteps echoed in the hall. Mom? Dad? I'm here. Happy anniversary. A fresh wave of agony washed over Eleanor. Jonathan. Their beautiful, brilliant son. The product of their love. Or was he? A new, terrifying suspicion, black and venomous, began to uncoil in the deepest recesses of her mind. Jonathan entered the study, his face alight with a smile that so resembled Robert's. He took in the scene, his mother's ashen, tear-streaked face, his father's stony silence, and his smile vanished. Whoa, what's going on? He asked, his gaze darting between them. Did you two have a fight? On your anniversary? Eleanor looked at her son, this man she had raised, loved, and devoted her life to. The suspicion was too monstrous to give voice to. She remained silent, paralyzed. Robert seized the opportunity. It's nothing, son, he said, his voice shifting back into the familiar paternal tone. Your mother is just upset over a silly misunderstanding at the county clerk's office. Some outdated paperwork. Mom? Jonathan asked, turning to her with concern. What's wrong? The dam broke. The words tumbled out in a torrent of grief and betrayal. He's not married to me, Jonathan. It was all a lie. He's legally married to Clara. Our whole life, our whole marriage, it's a sham. Jonathan stared at her, his expression cycling from confusion to disbelief to dawning horror. He looked at his father. Dad? What is she talking about? Is this true? Robert remained silent, which was confirmation enough. Instead of the outrage Eleanor expected, Jonathan's face settled into a mask of pragmatic sympathy. He walked over to her, kneeling before her chair and taking her shaking hands in his. Mom, please, he said, his voice soft, placating. You have to calm down. I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation. You're not young anymore. These kinds of shocks aren't good for your heart. Eleanor stared at him, uncomprehending. You're not young anymore. The words were like ice water. What are you saying, Jonathan? She whispered. I'm saying that Dad obviously had his reasons back then, Jonathan reasoned. Grandma and Grandpa were so traditional. They never would have accepted Aunt Clara, especially after Uncle Peter died. Dad probably just did what he had to do to keep the peace. And look at the life he's given you. Look at the life we've had. It's been a good life, hasn't it? What more could you possibly want? What more could you possibly want? He made it sound like she was being greedy. As if her desire for her marriage to be real, for her husband to have loved her, was an unreasonable demand after 50 years of service to a lie. His words were meant to comfort, but they were the final, cruelest twist of the knife. They revealed a horrifying truth. Her son, her only child, either knew about this or was so deeply enmeshed in his father's worldview that he could rationalize this monumental betrayal. He was choosing his father's comfort over her reality. But it was his use of the phrase, "What more could you possibly want?" that unlocked the darkest door in her mind. If the marriage was a lie, what else was? Robert's confession echoed in her ears. "I only ever wanted to build a life and a family with her." A family, Claire. A memory, sharp and terrifying, pierced through the fog of her grief. The birth of Jonathan. It had been a long, difficult labor. And Clara had been in the same hospital. Robert's brother had died just a year earlier, and Clara, pregnant and grieving, had been taken in by them. She had gone into labor on the very same day. Robert had been a frantic, nervous presence, pacing between the two maternity rooms. Eleanor had thought he was just an anxious, expectant father. Now the memory took on a sinister new light. She saw it all with horrifying clarity. The perfect, terrible logic of it. Robert wanted a family with Clara, but he wanted that family to have every advantage. He wanted his heir to be raised in comfort with stability by an educated woman. He wanted his son to have the life he deserved, not the life of a nomadic army nurse's child. And she, Eleanor, had provided the perfect cradle for that lie. She looked at Jonathan, at his familiar face, the face she had loved more than life itself, and saw a stranger. She saw Robert's eyes. She saw Clara's chin. "The baby," she breathed, her voice barely audible. "At the hospital. You switched them, didn't you?" Robert's placid mask finally slipped. A flicker of shock, then alarm, crossed his features. He opened his mouth to deny it, but the truth was written in his panic. Eleanor pressed on, the pieces falling into place with devastating speed. "My baby, my real son, what did you do with him?" The room was silent. Jonathan looked back and forth between his parents, his face a mask of confusion. "Mom, what are you talking about?" "What is she talking about, Dad?" Robert said nothing. He just stared at Eleanor, his eyes wide, caught. And then he confessed. It wasn't a grand, villainous monologue. It was a simple, cold statement of fact, as if he were discussing a business transaction that had gone slightly awry. Clara's child was sickly. It wouldn't have survived the life she led. Yours was strong. It was the only way to ensure my son had a future. A proper future. "My son," Eleanor repeated, the words tasting like ash. "Where is my son?" Robert's gaze dropped to the floor. He was a complication. Newborns are fragile. These things happen. He didn't say the words, but he didn't need to. Eleanor saw it in her mind as clearly as if she had been there. Robert taking her screaming newborn, her son, the child of her body, and holding him under the water of the pond behind the hospital. Silencing the complication. Ensuring his and Clara's secret would never cry out for its real mother. The cruelty was so absolute, so profound, that her mind could not contain it. The man she had loved had not only stolen her life, he had stolen her child and murdered him. And then he had given her his bastard to raise, and she had poured all her love, all her devotion, all her resources into that child. She had worked extra jobs to save for his education. She had stayed up nights nursing him through fevers. She had beamed with pride at his Harvard graduation, all the while funding the future of her husband's affair. She had been the willing, duped engine of her own destruction. A sound tore from her throat, a raw, animalistic scream of grief and rage that had been 50 years in the making. It was a sound of a soul being shredded. The world fragmented into a million piercing shards of light and pain. She felt herself falling, the study floor rushing up to meet her, and then there was only blessed, obliterating darkness. Consciousness returned not as a gentle awakening, but as a violent, sensory assault. A searing, familiar pain ripped through her abdomen, a pain she had not felt in 50 years. A blinding, harsh white light glared down from above, making her squint. The smell was unmistakable, antiseptic, sterilized linen, the metallic tang of blood. "I'm in the hospital," was her first groggy thought. I collapsed. Robert. Jonathan. The certificate. She tried to sit up, but the pain in her core held her pinned. Her body felt foreign, younger, taut with a vitality she had long forgotten. She turned her head and the room swam into focus. It was a hospital room, but it was all wrong. The equipment was outdated, the walls a faded mint green she remembered from a lifetime ago. A figure moved beside her bed. "Look, my love, a voice said, young and vibrant, filled with awe. Look how perfect our baby boy is. Eleanor's heart stopped. She knew that voice. It was Robert's voice, but stripped of the aged gravel and the decades of cold indifference. It was the voice of the young man she had married. She forced her eyes to focus. Standing over her, beaming down with a look of rapturous pride, was Robert. But it was the Robert from her wedding photo. His hair was thick and dark, his face unlined, his eyes bright with what she had once believed was love. He was holding a tightly swaddled newborn, cradling it with an expert tenderness that now made her want to vomit. This wasn't a memory. It was too vivid, too visceral. The pain was real. The light was real. His face was real. She looked around the room, her breath catching in her throat. This was the maternity ward of County General. This was the room she had been in after Jonathan was born. This was the past. A wave of dizzying, impossible understanding crashed over her. She hadn't just fainted. She had died of a broken heart. And she had been reborn? Sent back? Given a second chance? It didn't matter. The when was the only thing that mattered. She had been reborn to the most horrific day of her life. The day her son was murdered. The day the great lie began. Panic, pure and primal, gripped her. The child in Robert's arms was not hers. It was Jonathan. It was the child of Robert and Clara, the living, breathing evidence of their betrayal. And her own biological son was, at this very minute, lying helpless in Clara's room, moments from being drowned. Adrenaline, fierce and overriding, flooded her system. She ignored the tearing pain in her abdomen, the weakness in her limbs. She pushed herself up on her elbows, her arms shooting out with a strength she didn't know she possessed. Give him to me, she demanded, her voice a hoarse rasp, raw from a scream that hadn't happened yet in this timeline. Give him to me. Now. Robert blinked, startled by her ferocity. The gentle, adoring new mother had vanished, replaced by a wild-eyed woman with a terrifying intensity. He recovered quickly, his smile becoming slightly bemused. So eager, he chuckled, the picture of a doting father. All right. Here you go. Meet your son. He placed the swaddled bundle carefully into her arms. The weight of him was familiar and yet utterly alien. This was the baby she had raised, the baby she had believed was hers for 50 years. The baby she had loved with every fiber of her being. Now she felt only a cold, calculating dread. He had to be sure. Holding him with one arm, her fingers trembling, she pulled back the soft blue blanket. The baby whimpered, his tiny face scrunching up. With a deliberate, frantic motion, she opened the little white pants he wore. And there was a small, round, slightly raised birthmark on his left buttock. The same mark the grown man Jonathan had. The mark Robert had always called his lucky penny. The confirmation sent a wave of nauseating rage through her. Her blood felt like fire in her veins. This was him. This was the usurper. The cuckoo in her nest. Robert was still smiling, oblivious to the seismic shift that had just occurred in his wife's soul. He leaned in, his tone casual, rehearsed. They say babies with birthmarks on there but are lucky. Our son will definitely have a prosperous life, full of success. Eleanor let out a sound, a cold, mirthless, choked laugh that had no place in this joyful room. Of course he would. Because she would be the fool to ensure it. She would work herself to the bone, she would pour every ounce of her love and ambition into him, she would sell her grandmother's pearls to help pay for his Harvard tuition. And in the end he would pat her hand and tell her not to fuss over his father's affair with his real mother. The irony was so vicious it was almost beautiful. Thinking of all that, the wasted love, the stolen opportunities, the monumental ingratitude, a hatred so pure and focused crystallized within her. She wanted to tear the three of them apart. She wanted to watch their perfect selfish world burn. But first she had to find her real child. She had to get to him before Robert did. Suppressing the fury that threatened to consume her, she forced her features into a mask of exhausted concern. She took a shaky breath, making her voice weak and worried. Robert, she began, looking up at him with what she hoped passed for maternal anxiety. How is Clara? She was in so much pain last night. And her baby, is everything all right? The question was a gamble. If he had already done the deed, her chance was lost. But the timing felt the same as in her memory. He had come to her room first to show her their son before going to check on Clara. The effect on Robert was electric. His smile tightened almost imperceptibly. A muscle in his jaw twitched. He was a good actor, but she was now a director who knew every line of his script. "She's fine," he said a little too quickly. "Tired but fine. Gave birth to a boy." His eyes darted toward the door. "You just rest. Take care of our baby. Well, I'll just go check on her. Make sure the nurses are looking after her properly." He was eager to leave. Eager to finish his grim task. "Of course," Eleanor whispered, pulling the baby Jonathan close to her chest, playing her part. "Please give her my love." He nodded, gave her one last distracted smile, and almost bolted from the room. The moment the door clicked shut, the meekness vanished from Eleanor's face. It was replaced by a look of fierce, determined resolve. She was alone. And she had a very small window of opportunity. She reached for the call button on her bedside table and pressed it firmly. A few moments later, a middle-aged nurse with a kind, weary face entered the room. "Everything all right, dear? Need something for the pain?" "Nurse," Eleanor said, her voice low and urgent, cutting through the woman's routine cheer. "I need your help. It's about my sister-in-law, Clara Finch. In room 214. I'm worried about her. She's deeply unstable, grieving her late husband. She just told me she doesn't want her baby. She said she can't bear to look at him. I'm terrified she might do something to harm him. Or herself." She poured just the right amount of frantic sisterly concern into her voice. The nurse's eyes widened in professional alarm. Postpartum depression and psychosis were serious matters. "She needs to be assessed. Immediately," Eleanor pressed. "And her brother, my husband, he's just gone down there. He's not thinking clearly, he's too emotional. He might try to stop you from helping her. You need to get them both out of that room. Take them to a consulting room. Say it's standard procedure. Please. It's urgent." The nurse, now fully engaged, nodded briskly. "Don't you worry, Mrs. Vance. We'll handle this. You just rest." She turned and hurried from the room, her footsteps echoing purposefully down the hall. Eleanor's heart was hammering against her ribs. It was a lie, a terrible slander against a woman who, in this moment, was probably just exhausted and sad. But it was a necessary lie. She had to get Robert and Claire out of that room. She counted to 60, each second an eternity. Then, moving with a strength born of pure desperation, she swung her legs over the side of the bed. The pain was excruciating, a hot knife in her gut, but she ignored it. She stood, her legs wobbling, and clutched the bedside table for support. She grabbed the swaddled baby from the bassinet. Holding him against her chest, she shuffled out of her room and into the corridor. The hall was quiet, the only sound the distant clatter of a meal cart. She moved as quickly as she could, her body screaming in protest, toward room 214. He paused outside the door. She could hear voices inside, Robert's, raised in frustration, and the calm, firm tone of the nurse. Good. Her plan was working. Peeking through the small window in the door, she saw the nurse ushering a confused and protesting Robert and a pale, weary-looking Clara out of the room. "It's just a standard psychological assessment, Captain Vance, for the mother's well-being. It will only take a moment." As their footsteps faded down the hall, Eleanor didn't hesitate. She pushed the door open and slipped inside. The room was identical to hers, but it felt colder, emptier. And there, on the narrow hospital bed, lying alone and utterly still, was a tiny, fragile newborn. He wasn't swaddled neatly. He was just lying on his back on a rough hospital blanket, his chest barely moving. His skin had a faint, bluish tinge. He had been left to die of neglect or something worse. A love so profound and instinctual it transcended time itself erupted in Eleanor's soul. It was a pull, a recognition that went deeper than memory, deeper than reason. This was her son. Her blood. Her child. Tears, hot and unreserved, streamed down her face. She didn't bother to wipe them away. She lunged forward, ignoring the screaming pain in her body. In one swift, decisive motion, she placed the baby she had been holding, Robert and Clara's son, onto the bare bed. Then, with infinite tenderness, she gathered the tiny, fragile body of her true son into her arms. She pulled the soft blue blanket from the other baby and wrapped it tightly around him, cradling him against her heart. He felt lighter, smaller. A fierce, protective fury surged through her. They had left him to die. "I'm here," she whispered into his downy head, her voice thick with tears. "Mama's here. I've got you." I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I wasn't here before. I'm here now. And I will never, ever leave you again. He made a small, mewling sound, a faint spark of life, and nuzzled against her chest. She had done it. He had switched them back. Holding her precious rescued son, Eleanor Vance shuffled back to her room, her body aching but her spirit soaring with a triumphant, ferocious joy. The game was now afoot, and she knew every single move her opponent would make. Back in the safety of her room, Eleanor collapsed onto the bed, clutching her son to her chest. The adrenaline that had fueled her mission began to ebb, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and the searing pain of her body's trauma. But it was a pain she welcomed. It was real. It was for her child. She examined him in the light, her heart swelling with a love so intense it was almost painful. He was perfect. His features were finer than the other babies, his hair a little darker. He felt right in her arms in a way the other child never had, a truth she could only recognize now with the hindsight of a lifetime. She traced his cheek with a trembling finger, and he turned his head toward her touch, a tiny instinctual gesture that brought fresh tears to her eyes. This was the moment she had been robbed of. This pure, unadulterated bond untouched by betrayal. She had just settled him into the bassinet when the door to her room opened. Robert walked in, and trailing just behind him like a shadow was Clara Finch. Clara looked exactly as Eleanor remembered her from this time, pale with large, sorrowful eyes that always seemed on the verge of tears. She was beautiful in a fragile, ethereal way that made people want to protect her. Eleanor now saw it for the calculated performance it was. Her grief was a tool, her weakness a weapon. Robert's face was a mask of concerned confusion. "The nurses pulled us away for some ridiculous questionnaire," he said, irritation evident in his tone. "Apparently they're worried about everyone's state of mind now." He shook his head, then his eyes fell on the bassinet. His expression softened into that familiar, fake paternal pride. "How is our little man?" Before Eleanor could answer, Clara stepped forward. Her eyes, those deep, seemingly compassionate pools, locked onto the baby in the bassinet. A dazzling, possessive smile spread across her face. It was too bright, too eager. "Oh, Robert, look at him," she gushed, her voice dripping with a syrupy sweetness that turned Eleanor's stomach. "He's just perfect. So plump and fair. You can tell he's going to be so clever." Her performance was flawless. She looked every inch the doting aunt. But her gaze was that of a mother looking upon her own child. Eleanor felt a primal urge to stand between Clara and the bassinet, to shield her son from that covetous look. Clara's eyes then dropped to the cotton blanket he was swaddled in, the same blanket that had been around her own biological son moments ago. Her smile faltered, replaced by a pinch of disapproval. "Oh, Eleanor, no," she said, rushing forward with a false sense of urgency. "You can't use this rough cotton on him. It could irritate his perfect skin." She rummaged in a large bag she was carrying and pulled out a small bundle. "Use these instead. I had them specially made." She held out a set of baby clothes made from the finest, softest silk and cashmere, embroidered with delicate initials. S.V. Simon Vance. The name they had chosen for their child. Eleanor stared at the offering, her blood running cold. The audacity was breathtaking. Then Clara leaned in, her hands outstretched, clearly eager to take the baby from the bassinet, to dress him herself, to claim him. Eleanor moved faster than she thought possible. She shifted her body, blocking Clara's path, and placed a protective hand on the bassinet. Her tone when she spoke was colder than the hospital's linoleum floor. "He's my child," she said, each word sharp and precise. "I will take care of him." The rebuff was so direct, so unlike the pliable, agreeable Eleanor she had always been, that it left Clara momentarily stunned. Her outstretched hands froze in midair. The dazzling smile on her face flickered and died, replaced by a flash of pure, unguarded irritation. She recovered quickly, forcing the smile back onto her lips, but it no longer reached her eyes. "Of course," Clara said, her voice slightly strained. "You're a college graduate after all. I'm sure you'll raise him well. You'll help him become someone truly great." She continued to look at the baby with a gaze full of naked affection, as if he were truly hers. The display was so grotesque it made Eleanor's stomach churn. This woman was mourning the child she believed to be dead, the child she had willingly left to die, while coveting the one she thought was her own. The psychological dissonance was staggering. It was then that Robert, perhaps sensing the tension, decided to intervene. He stepped forward, his voice adopting a gentle, placating tone he often used when he wanted his own way. "Now that the baby's here," he said, smiling at them both, "we should make it official. We need to choose a name. I've always been fond of Simon. Simon Vance. It has a strong, elegant ring to it, don't you think?" Eleanor remembered this moment from her previous life. He had presented her with a list of names, all of them chosen in advance by him and Clara. He had always favored Simon the most. He liked it because she did. In her first life, Eleanor had agreed, wanting to please her handsome husband. Now the name sounded like a curse. She rejected it on the spot, her voice leaving no room for argument. "No. His name will be Daniel. Daniel Vance." The room went silent. Robert's smile vanished, replaced by a dark confusion. Clara's forced pleasantry melted into a look of sharp displeasure. "Daniel," Robert repeated as if tasting something unpleasant. "Eleanor, we discussed this. We agreed on the names from the list I gave you. Simon is so much more distinguished." Eleanor met his gaze evenly. She gave him a cold, knowing smile and gestured slightly toward the bassinet. "Then why don't you raise him yourself? Since you're so invested in the name." Robert blinked, thrown completely off balance. What are you talking about? You seem to have very strong opinions on how my child should be named and cared for," she continued, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "If you're so certain, perhaps you should stay home and do it." "What? Are you still hoping I'll be the one to pour my whole heart into raising him?" The challenge, the subtle accusation in her words, hung in the air. It was a direct hit. His entire plan relied on her unquestioning devotion. He shut his mouth immediately, his face a mixture of anger and confusion. He couldn't afford to upset her now, not when she held the key to his future, or so he thought. Clara could no longer contain her irritation. Her voice, when she spoke, had lost its sugary tone and taken on an oddly sharp, needling quality. "Since you've chosen to name him yourself, I hope you'll," she paused, searching for the right barb, "treat him right. A name is a responsibility. I'd hate to see such a sturdy name go to waste." Eleanor turned her cold gaze on Clara. "No need to worry yourself, Clara. You should focus your energy on taking care of your own child." She put a deliberate emphasis on the last two words. The effect was instant. At the mention of the son she had borne, Clara's face contorted in a mask of genuine distaste. She couldn't hide her visceral irritation. "Wine?" she spat, the word laced with venom. "That thing was nothing but bad luck. I can't stand the sight of him. Just looking at him makes me miserable." The baby had been born less than a day ago, and she was already expressing pure hatred. "Such misfortune," she muttered under her breath, as if the child were a curse and not a piece of her own soul. A cold sweat broke out on Eleanor's palms. The confirmation of Clara's callousness was chilling. If she had been even a few minutes later in her previous life, her son would have been murdered. If she had been later today, he would have died of neglect. But what chilled her even more was the conversation that followed. Robert, seeking to regain control of the situation, nodded in agreement with Clara. His face showed nothing but cold indifference. "The doctor said he was weak. These things happen. It's a shame, but it's nature's way." Eleanor felt a hysterical laugh bubble in her throat. Nature's way? He had literally just confessed to murder in her previous life. She couldn't help herself. She had to ask, had to hear the lie from his lips in this timeline. Is he really gone? Robert's eyes flashed with disdain. "Of course. Newborns are fragile. He probably just choked. Stopped breathing. It's not uncommon." He paused, then added, his tone shifting to a gentle command, "You should put this sad business behind you. Just focus on taking good care of Daniel. He's the family's only hope now." Clara didn't argue. He didn't care. Her eyes were already back on the baby in the bassinet, her expression once again one of covetous longing. That other baby, her own flesh and blood, was already forgotten. "Good riddance," she said without a shred of shame. Eleanor lowered her eyes, bitter mockery rising in her chest. She used to feel sorry for Clara, believing her heartbreak had led her to pour all her misplaced love into Jonathan. Now she knew the truth. It had never been misplaced. It had always been for her own son. Everything made sense, and the sense it made was monstrous. Fighting the urge to scream at them to tear their eyes out, she gave them a few cold, dismissive words. "I'm very tired. I need to rest. Please leave." They left, Robert confused and irritated, Clara casting one last longing look at the baby she believed was hers. Once alone, Eleanor's resolve hardened into steel. She had seen their true faces. There would be no remorse, no redemption. They were toxic and they needed to be excised from her life and the life of her son. But first she had to be certain. As soon as she felt strong enough, she made the painful journey down to the hospital's morgue. With a story about being a grieving aunt needing to say a final goodbye, she was allowed a moment. There on a cold slab was the tiny lifeless body of Clara's baby. The baby Robert had drowned. A wave of sorrow not for the child, but for the horrific act itself washed over her. She took a careful look, confirming the birthmark was there. This was the child they had killed with their own hands. The evidence of their crime. She committed every detail to memory. It was a grim necessity. On her slow, painful walk back to the maternity ward, she took a quieter corridor to avoid the main traffic. And there, entangled in a dimly lit corner, were Robert and Clara. They were locked in a passionate, desperate kiss, completely oblivious to the world around them. Eleanor froze, pressing herself against the cold wall, hidden in shadow. She heard Clara's voice, gasping and breathless between kisses. "David, we finally got rid of that little curse today. You're not feeling guilty, are you? After all, he was your son." Robert's voice, full of a tender passion he had never shown her, replied without a moment's hesitation. "Of course not. The only child I care about is the one you gave birth to. The one she had was just a worthless brat." Then he added with a smug, conspiratorial grin she could hear in his voice. "Still, she's proven useful. Smart enough to raise our child without suspecting a thing. And once we're stationed at the base, no one will be around to interfere. Isn't that what you've always wanted?" Clara blushed, playfully punching his chest. "Ah, you're such a scoundrel." The conversation was so vile, so devoid of basic humanity, that Eleanor's stomach revolted. A wave of nausea overwhelmed her. Without thinking, driven by a rage so pure it bypassed reason, she grabbed a loose brick that had fallen from a nearby repair cart. Taking advantage of their tangled, oblivious state, she hurled it with all her strength toward them. It clattered against the wall just inches from their heads, shattering the quiet and their passionate moment. They jumped apart with startled yelps, panicked and scrambling to compose themselves, looking around frantically for the source of the attack. But Eleanor was already gone, melting back into the shadows and hurrying back to her room, her heart pounding not with fear, but with a savage, satisfying fury. The war had begun. The following weeks were a masterclass in duplicity. Eleanor played her part to perfection. She was the exhausted new mother, the understanding wife, the grieving sister-in-law. She allowed Robert and Clara to believe their plan was proceeding flawlessly. She came home from the hospital to the house that was supposed to be her home, a place that now felt like a beautifully furnished prison. Robert and Clara had moved in together under one roof, a fact that had once been explained away by Clara's grief and need for family support. Now the arrangement felt brazen, an open secret they flaunted right under her nose. While Eleanor recovered from the birth and cared for her newborn son, Daniel, around the clock, Clara held court in the guest room like a queen. She stayed in bed all day demanding trays of food, complaining of fatigue and a broken spirit. Robert doted on her, feeding her himself, speaking to her in low, intimate tones. Sometimes, when his attentions to Clara became too obvious, he would remember his act and turn to Eleanor. "You understand, don't you, Ellie?" he'd say, his voice oozing false concern. "Clara lost her baby. She's emotionally fragile. You're so strong. You're the only one I can count on now." Eleanor would simply nod, saying nothing. His hypocrisy was staggering. He didn't see her up at all hours, soothing a crying Daniel, her body aching with exhaustion. He never once asked if she was tired, if she needed help, if her pain was manageable. His focus was entirely on his mistress and the son he believed she had borne him. Every night when Daniel would cry, Robert would groan in annoyance. "I have to get some sleep, Eleanor. I have responsibilities. I can't function with this noise." Without a second thought, he would grab his pillow and slip down the hall into Clara's room, closing the door behind him. The next morning, Clara would appear at the breakfast table with a smug, satisfied glow, covering her mouth with a fake yawn. "You look exhausted, sis-in-law," she'd giggle, her tone dripping with gleeful superiority. "Such dark circles. Didn't sleep a wink last night, huh?" Eleanor would just smile faintly and sip her tea. She had no energy to waste on their games. While they were lost in their self-absorbed world, she was quietly, methodically preparing her escape. She started packing little by little behind their backs. She couldn't take much, just essential documents, a few items of sentimental value, and the small stash of cash she had saved from her old job. She hid them in a bag at the back of her closet, buried under winter blankets. She began making discreet phone calls from a payphone at the grocery store, reactivating old professional networks she had let languish for Robert's sake. Robert, so caught up in his own deceit and his anticipation of a future with Clara at the army base, was utterly oblivious. He didn't notice the quiet determination in his wife's eyes, the new steel in her spine. He still saw her as the malleable, trusting woman he had married. His complacency was shattered one evening when he came home from work holding an official-looking envelope, his expression dark and confused. "Eleanor," he said, his voice tight as he found her rocking Daniel in the living room. "What is this?" The envelope had bold letters printed on the front. "Interdepartmental transfer order, confirmation copy." It was from the research institute where she had worked before getting pregnant. Eleanor's heart skipped a beat, but her face remained a placid mask. She stayed calm, took the envelope from him and walked over to the fireplace where a low fire crackled. "It's nothing, Robert," she said, her voice weary. "You know my old supervisors. They've been trying to get me to transfer to the Beijing branch for years. But with a newborn." She tossed the envelope into the flames. It caught immediately, the edges curling and blackening. "How could I possibly leave you two? It's just a formality. I've already written to them to refuse." She knew exactly what Robert wanted to hear. The transfer letter, now meaningless ash, burned quietly. His expression relaxed, the suspicion replaced by smug satisfaction. He believed he had her exactly where he wanted her. "That's my girl," he said, his voice warm with approval. "That's good. A married woman should be home raising her child. It's where you belong. You're so smart. Perfect for teaching our son." He was already envisioning the future he had planned for her. A glorified, unpaid tutor for his heir. Then, as if to shift the subject and reassert his control, he added, "The baby's almost a month old. I'm planning a banquet to celebrate. A proper one. After all, he's our family's only heir. We should show him off." Eleanor looked up from Daniel's sleeping face and smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes for the first time in weeks. "Sounds perfect," she agreed easily. "The more people, the merrier." Robert beamed, believing her enthusiasm was for the celebration. He didn't see the cold fire behind her eyes. He didn't realize she was enthusiastic for an entirely different reason. The celebration wouldn't be a showcase of his heir. It would be the stage for his very public downfall. The trap was set. All she had to do was wait for him to walk into it. True to his word, Robert pulled out all the stops. He booked the grandest banquet hall at the upscale Guiding restaurant, a place all polished brass and crisp white tablecloths. He invited everyone, high-ranking military officers, his colleagues, distant relatives, old family friends. He wanted the world to see Captain Robert Vance, the family man, celebrating his heir. The air buzzed with conversation and clinking glasses. Robert, resplendent in a new tailored suit, moved through the crowd, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, his grin so wide it looked like it might split his face. By his side, glowing with triumph, was Clara. She wore a stylish, form-fitting Western dress, her arm often linked with Robert's. To any objective observer, they looked more like the married couple than Robert and the pale, quietly dressed Eleanor holding the baby in the corner. Eleanor watched them, her expression neutral. She held Daniel close, drawing strength from his warm, sleeping weight. She was a specter at her own feast, a quiet volcano waiting to erupt. As the celebration reached its peak, Robert tapped a knife against his glass, calling for silence. The room quieted, all eyes turning toward him. He cleared his throat, his face a picture of proud affection as he looked at Eleanor. "Friends, family, distinguished colleagues," he began, his voice projecting through the room. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate our son, the newest little Vance." A wave of affectionate laughter rippled through the crowd. I especially want to thank my wife, Eleanor. He turned to her with a look of such deep fake affection it made her skin crawl. Thank you for giving me this perfect son. But as you all know, my duty calls. I'll be heading to my new post soon, and Clara, as dedicated Army medical staff, will be joining me. So I'm counting on you, my love, to hold down the fort. To raise him well. I have every faith you'll raise him into someone truly exceptional. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. He was publicly praising her while simultaneously announcing his abandonment, wrapping it all in the flag of duty and sacrifice. The crowd ate it up. Murmurs of admiration for his service filled the room. Clara's smile was radiant, victorious. Don't you worry, sis-in-law, she added, her voice carrying easily. I'll take good care of Robert for you. You just focus on raising the little one at home. She made it sound like Eleanor was being given a menial chore while they jetted off to a life of adventure. The people around them nodded approvingly, praising their nobility, their selfless dedication to country over family. Eleanor felt her fists clench beneath Daniel's blanket. Robert had pressured her into giving up her career to stay home, and now he was being celebrated for doing the opposite with Clara. The senior officers were particularly pleased. One grizzled general clapped Robert on the back. Even Comrade Emily treats this child as her own. It's clear your family gets along very harmoniously. I feel confident in trusting this mission to you, Captain Vance. Robert beamed, puffing out his chest with pride. Relatives took turns coming over to coo at the baby. One of Robert's aunts, a sweet-faced elderly woman, held Daniel for a moment and chuckled. Oh, Eleanor, he has your look about him. Round the eyes. He's going to be a heartbreaker, this one. It was an innocent, kindly remark. But Clara, overhearing it, scowled. She shot the aunt a venomous glare and immediately swooped in, snatching the baby back with a possessiveness that was jarring. Boys should resemble their fathers, she said sharply, her voice losing its sugary tone. He clearly takes after Robert. They're practically cut from the same mold. The aunt glanced at Eleanor, embarrassed and awkward, but Eleanor just gave a small, forgiving smile. She said nothing. The pieces were aligning perfectly. Clara, eager to spend a few more precious moments with the baby she believed was hers, held him close. But she had barely held him for a few minutes when he suddenly burst into loud, inconsolable wails right in her face. Startled, Clara let out a small shriek. A warm dampness spread through the fine silk of her dress and onto the blanket. The baby had chosen that moment to have a spectacular diaper leak. The kindly aunt jumped into action. Oh dear, looks like someone's had an accident. Let me help you change him, dear. Clara's affection for the child, Eleanor observed, clearly did not extend to the messier aspects of motherhood. Her face was a mask of disgust. She wrinkled her nose and handed the squalling, wet baby off to the aunt as if he were a toxic waste bag, then stood back to watch from a safe distance. But as the aunt laid the baby on a padded bench and began to unwrap the wet blanket and unpeel the little pants, Clara's face underwent a terrifying transformation. Her smug satisfaction melted into confusion, then disbelief, then raw, undiluted horror. A shrill, ear-piercing scream escaped her lips, cutting through the party's murmur. Robert, who had been accepting a drink from a waiter, spun around, frowning. What's going on? Clara, why are you shouting? But Clara was beyond hearing. She stood frozen, pointing a trembling finger at the baby's now exposed skin. Her voice, when it came, was a strangled whisper. Why doesn't he have the birthmark? The question hung in the suddenly silent room. Most of the guests were confused, but Robert's face immediately lost all its color. He knew exactly what she meant. He lunged forward, grabbing the baby from the flustered aunt and frantically checking his skin, turning him over and over in a desperate, rough search. In the entire past month, neither he nor Clara had bothered to truly care for the baby. This was their first time actually seeing him undressed. They searched with a growing, panicked desperation. The baby, irritated and frightened by the rough handling, screwed up his face and cried even harder. Eleanor chose that moment to step forward. Her voice was urgent and scolding, the picture of an outraged mother. Robert, what in God's name are you doing? Give me back my son. Her words snapped Clara out of her stupor. When she heard Eleanor's voice, she snapped her head around, her eyes wild with a dawning, horrific understanding. She lunged at Eleanor, shrieking, her hands clawing the air. It was you, wasn't it? You did this. You switched them. Where is my baby? Where is my son? Eleanor shoved her away with one strong arm and took her son back from a stunned Robert, holding Daniel tightly against her chest. Her voice was icy, projecting to the now utterly silent, rapt audience. What are you talking about, Clara? I don't understand a word you're saying. This is my son, Daniel Vance. How could he possibly be yours? She let the question hang in the air before delivering the coup de grace. Wasn't your poor child stillborn? Clara's face twisted into a grotesque mask of rage and panic. Her words were jumbled, hysterical. No. That's not right. You switched them. You stole my baby. Give him back to me. Eleanor stared her down, the corners of her mouth curling into a cold, pitiless smile. She had prepared for this. She reached into the large diaper bag she had brought and pulled out a small stack of black and white photographs. I think the grief has been too much for you, Clara, she said, her voice loud and clear for all to hear. I even asked the hospital to take pictures of your son for the funeral records. You and Robert were too distraught to make the arrangements, so I handled it. I paid for it all. She held up one of the photos. I know you're heartbroken, but that doesn't mean you can pretend my child is yours. In the photo was the lifeless body of the baby they had drowned. And on his skin, clear and distinct, was the round birthmark. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Clara stared at the photo as if it were a venomous snake. She shook from head to toe, refusing to accept the truth that she had killed her own child. No, she screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. That's impossible. It was supposed to be your son who died. The silence in the banquet hall was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. And then the whispers began, slowly at first, then building into a roar of shocked speculation. Robert's face was a ghastly shade of gray. He was caught. The guests' eyes, once full of admiration, were now wide with shock and dawning disgust. Captain Armstrong, someone finally called out, their voice laced with confusion and judgment. What is the meaning of this? Didn't Comrade Clara's baby pass away? Your child is perfectly healthy. Everyone knew it was Clara's baby who had died. The child in Eleanor's arms was hers. No one could make sense of Clara's outburst, and the scene descended into chaos. David tried to speak, to bluster his way out, but his words were a jumble of incoherent excuses. Clara, seeing her perfect world crumbling, completely lost her mind. The one who died wasn't, she shrieked. But Robert, in a moment of desperate self-preservation, reached out and clamped his hand over her mouth. He glanced frantically at the senior officers, their faces now like thunder. Shut up, he hissed under his breath. Are you insane? Clara fought against him, pounding her fists on his chest, her eyes bloodshot. You heartless bastard. You were in on it. You plotted this with her. You tricked me. You told me the one who drowned was Eleanor's son. That our son was safe. Give me back my son. Her confession, screamed in front of hundreds of people, sent another, more powerful wave of shock through the crowd. The whispers turned into open condemnation. I can't believe it, he tried to drown a baby? His own child. Or Eleanor's. They're monsters. Both of them. Eleanor stood at the epicenter of the storm, holding her son, watching the chaos unfold with cold, grim satisfaction. The celebratory banquet had become a public execution of their reputations. The senior officer, his face dark with fury, stood and shouted, Captain Armstrong, explain yourself. Now. But there was no explanation that could untangle this web. Robert, pale and sweating, his dress shirt soaked through, looked around the room like a cornered animal. His eyes, wild with panic, finally landed on Eleanor, standing calm and resolute with their son. He pointed a shaking finger at her, his voice a desperate shout. I don't know anything. It was her. Mia planned all of this. It was her scheme. She told me the baby had drowned. And Clara, out of pity, gave her son to raise. We didn't know she had already switched them. He was pushing the blame onto her, trying to wash his hands clean and play the victim. Some guests, confused by the shifting stories, turned to Eleanor for clarification. Is that true, Eleanor? Robert didn't let her answer. Of course it is. Why would I ever harm my own son? This is all a terrible misunderstanding. Eleanor stared at him, her lips curling into a bitter smile. She had waited a lifetime for this moment. Robert Vance, she said, her voice ringing out clear and steady, don't just lie to everyone. Are you trying to lie to yourself too? You were the one who switched the babies. You were the one who tried to drown him, and now you want to twist the truth. His composure broke. You saw the birthmark on that child the day he was born, he blurted out without thinking. You had to be the one who switched them afterward. Eleanor tilted her head slightly, her voice a razor. Oh, so you admit you knew about the birthmark? Then how did that baby end up in my hospital room? Wasn't it you who made the switch first? He fell silent, stunned and speechless, trapped by his own words. Eleanor raised her voice for all to hear. If I hadn't realized in time and switched them back, the one who'd be dead now is my son. The fury that had been burning in her for a lifetime finally broke free. She stepped forward and slapped him hard across the face, the sound echoing in the silent hall. You tried to murder your own child, your flesh and blood. Are you even human? She turned to the crowd, her eyes brimming with tears that were no longer fake. Dear family, friends, at first I thought it was a hospital mistake. A simple mix-up. I was going to keep quiet for the sake of family peace. But now I see the truth. Robert Vance, this monster, conspired with Clara to murder my child. By sheer chance they failed. And now they have the audacity to stand here and frame me. Robert's expression twisted with pure hatred. He looked like he could kill her on the spot. Lies. You're slandering me. Shut your mouth. You have no proof. Clara glared with venomous hatred. Stop pretending. My son is dead. Yours is alive. Isn't that proof enough? You murderer. But their stories were shredded, their logic in tatters. No one was convinced. The evidence of their own hysterical words was enough. The senior officer had seen and heard enough. His voice, stern and final, cut through the noise. Enough, Captain Vance. I'm deeply disappointed. Your lies are an insult to everyone here. Do you take us for fools? Robert's face turned desperate. Sir, please, this has nothing to do with me. Let me explain. You need to reflect on your actions, the officer interrupted coldly. You are relieved of your command. You will not be going to the new post. As for the crimes you may have committed, they will be investigated thoroughly. At those words, the last of the color drained from Robert's face. His lips trembled. His career, his future, his honor. It was all gone, evaporated in a few minutes of public scandal. His legs buckled and he collapsed to the floor in a heap of defeated misery. The officer then turned to Eleanor, his expression softening with genuine sincerity and shame. Comrade Vance. I failed in my oversight. I didn't notice his misconduct in time. This is ultimately your family's matter. It is not my place to intervene too much. You must decide for yourself what to do next. Eleanor understood what he was offering. A chance for her to choose her own path without official interference. She nodded, her voice firm. Thank you for your concern, sir. But I promise this will never happen again. I'm transferring to Beijing. I've already accepted a position. The words hit Robert like a physical blow. He looked up from the floor, his eyes wide with a new kind of panic. No, he whispered. Then louder, no, that's not possible. You burned the transfer letter yourself. I saw you. Eleanor gave him a cool, victorious glance. That was just the notification copy, Robert. The real transfer order was processed and confirmed the moment it was sent out. I'm leaving. And I'm taking my son with me. The reality of his loss, not just of his career but of his carefully laid plans, crashed down on him. His eyes met hers, dark with a rage born of utter powerlessness. We're husband and wife, he seethed, his voice a low, threatening growl. I won't let you leave me. You'll never get away. I'm your husband. Are you really going to turn your back on me? Eleanor simply smiled. She had been waiting for this moment. She reached into her diaper bag one final time and pulled out the pieces of their torn, forged marriage certificate. She tossed the fragments at his feet like confetti. His face twisted slightly. Why would you tear that up? You think that changes anything? Even if you shred it, it doesn't undo our marriage. Eleanor nodded, a slow, deliberate clap. Exactly. Even if I tear it to pieces, it doesn't undo our marriage. She paused, letting the confusion show on his face before delivering the final blow. Because we were never really married in the first place. Robert's expression faltered. He looked at her, stunned, searching her face. What are you talking about? We had a legal ceremony. We registered. Did we? Eleanor let out a cold, sharp laugh. Enough. You're tired from pretending and I'm tired of listening. The only reason I didn't destroy this fake certificate completely was because I wanted to ask. How exactly did you forge something so convincing? The gasp from the crowd was audible. A fake marriage certificate? The scandal deepened, becoming a bottomless pit of deception. He's been living a double life, someone muttered. Bigamy. All these years. Robert's face grew darker, more terrifying with each whispered condemnation. The humiliation was complete. And then Eleanor dropped her last bomb. Robert, if you wanted to be with Clara, you could have just left. You had me cooking and cleaning for you while you secretly registered a legal marriage and had a child with your widowed sister-in-law. What was the point of all this? He looked up shocked. How much do you know? He breathed. Others began questioning her, stunned. Eleanor, could there be some misunderstanding? This is incredible. You want to know who the father of Clara's baby is? Eleanor said, her voice clear and strong. It's Robert. He and Clara went and got a marriage certificate behind my back. The fake one he gave me was just a cover. She turned to address the crowd. If you don't believe me, go to our house. Their real certificate is still in Clara's room. It's easy to prove. Not that anyone needed proof anymore. Clara herself had confessed everything. She clutched at Robert's arm, shaking it furiously. Robert, are you even a man? How can you just let them humiliate me like this? Robert, overwhelmed and drowning, finally snapped. He brushed her off with a sharp, irritated motion. Enough, Clara. Is now really the time for this? His patience, his pretense of love for her, had worn thin under the pressure. He couldn't even be bothered to pretend anymore. He turned back to Eleanor, his eyes desperate, his voice suddenly soft and pleading, trying to salvage something from the wreckage. Eleanor, it was all a misunderstanding. I wasn't thinking clearly. I hurt you. But from now on I'll make it right. Just give me a chance to make it up to you. Eleanor remained unmoved, her face a mask of stone. There's nothing left to discuss. He reached out, trying to grab her hand. Don't forget, we have a son together. How will you raise him all on your own? I can't stand the thought of you working yourself to death. Please, as long as you stay, you'll never want for anything. You won't need to work. There'll always be money. Isn't that a good life? Please don't leave. He poured out a stream of promises and sweet talk, but it was all meaningless noise. From the side, Clara finally couldn't hold back. Her voice turned bitter and sarcastic. Robert, what's the meaning of this? Everyone knows we're the real couple now. Why are you still clinging to her? He sneered. Some women really know how to play their cards. Just a few words and a man's soul is hooked. Before Eleanor could even respond, Robert turned on Clara, his eyes icy. Shut your mouth. Eleanor is my real, rightful wife. If it hadn't been for your seduction, I never would have lost my mind and married you. I was meant to be with Eleanor. You ruined everything. Clara looked as if she'd been struck. She staggered back, pale and trembling with a new kind of betrayal. You bastard. My husband wasn't even cold in the ground before you pulled me into your bed. You got me pregnant. You promised we'd be together forever. You said we'd live as husband and wife. And now you're just going to throw me away. She lunged at him, grabbing onto him desperately, and the two of them began to struggle and shout, their obscene, humiliating secrets tumbling out for all to hear. The guests watched, their expressions turning from shock to utter disgust. Heartless man. Disgusting. Robert finally broke free, his suit disheveled, his face scratched. He looked a complete mess but still had the nerve to turn to Eleanor with desperate eyes. I'll make it up to you. I'll divorce Clara. We can go register our marriage today. For real this time. You'll be my only wife, please. Eleanor couldn't help it. She laughed, a cold, sharp sound. She slapped his pleading hand away. I don't care who you marry, Robert. But one thing is certain. It will never be me. She met his eyes, her gaze steady and clear. Without you, my life will only get better. You were the dead weight holding me down. His face turned deathly pale. For the first time, he seemed to feel a genuine flicker of regret, not for hurting her but for losing his comfortable arrangement. No, please just listen. At that moment, a new group of men in uniforms stormed into the banquet hall. The man leading them wore the insignia of the military police. We received a report, he announced, his voice firm and echoing in the hall. Captain Robert Vance is under investigation for abuse of power, forgery of official documents, and violation of military conduct. Please come with us. Gasp swept the room. Robert was restrained. He struggled, shouting, "I didn't do anything. This is a mistake." The lead officer remained calm. "We do not act without substantial evidence." At the same time, Clara, cowering in the corner, was also taken into custody. She panicked and screamed, "What are you doing? I'm just a civilian. Why are you arresting me?" Seeing this, Robert's confident mask finally shattered completely. His panic was palpable. The officer continued, "Robert Vance is also suspected of misusing his position to falsify a military doctor's identity for Clara Finch and of seizing opportunities meant for others. We'll be taking both of them in." The crowd now understood the full, sordid extent of the corruption. Robert's commanding officer looked furious. "I promoted you because I trusted you. You are shameless. Completely without integrity." Clara was sobbing uncontrollably. "Robert, help me. Please save me. It was all your idea." But Robert couldn't care less. He was a broken man. As they dragged him away, he twisted back toward Eleanor, desperate. "Eleanor, I love you. It was never real with her. I swear. Help me. Tell them the truth." Eleanor looked at him calmly, coldly. As he was pulled through the doors, his eyes widened in a final, horrific realization. He knew. "It was you," he whispered, the words meant only for her. "You found the evidence. You reported me. Why?" Eleanor took a step forward and replied softly, her voice carrying only to him. "This isn't revenge, Robert. It's consequences." The doors closed behind him, cutting off his stunned, devastated face. The once grand banquet hall fell into a dead silence. The party was over. The stunned silence in the banquet hall was thicker than fog. The glittering lights, the half-eaten plates of food, the abandoned glasses of champagne, it all seemed to mock the celebration that had just been publicly executed. Eleanor stood amidst the wreckage, a statue of calm holding her sleeping son. He was the only real thing in a room that had just been proven to be a stage for a 50-year lie. Guests began to slip away, their exits hushed and hurried. They averted their eyes from Eleanor not out of malice, but from a profound collective embarrassment. They had applauded the monster and pitied the woman who was, in fact, the only hero in the story. An elderly Aunt Agnes, a woman whose own life had been marked by a quiet, resilient strength, broke from the crowd and approached. Her gnarled hand patted Eleanor's arm, her eyes deep wells of sorrow. "You can't rely on men, dear," she muttered, a piece of folk wisdom that felt both inadequate and utterly true. "But life goes on. This little one looks so sweet. He'll grow up to be someone special." Eleanor looked down at Daniel's peaceful face, untouched by the chaos his very existence had caused. She gave Aunt Agnes a genuine weary smile. "Thank you, Aunt Agnes. But he doesn't have to be exceptional. As long as he grows up to be kind and honest, that will be more than enough for me." The old woman nodded, a understanding passing between them, and then she too melted away, leaving Eleanor alone in the vast, empty room. The next few days were a blur of grim necessity. The military police conducted their interviews. Eleanor answered their questions with a cool, dispassionate clarity that seemed to unnerve them more than hysterics would have. She provided copies of the hospital photos, recounted the conversation she'd overheard between Robert and Clara about drowning the worthless brat, and directed them to the real marriage certificate hidden among Clara's things. She learned that Robert had been officially dismissed from his position. The title captain was stripped from him, along with his pension and all the privileges of his rank. He was awaiting a court-martial and then would likely face a civilian trial for attempted murder and fraud. Clara was being held as an accomplice. The news was delivered by a young, uncomfortable lieutenant who couldn't meet her eyes. A neighbor, Mrs. Gable, brought over a casserole, the universal language of suburban crisis. "It's just terrible, dear. Just terrible," she clucked, her eyes alight with the thrilling horror of it all. Will you go to see him? One last time? After all, you were together for so many years." Eleanor stopped packing the book she was holding into a crate. She looked out the window at the familiar street, the house she had turned into a home for a fantasy. "Years of lies don't entitle you to a farewell, Mrs. Gable," she said, her voice soft but final. "There's nothing left to say." She had already booked their tickets. The northbound train left in 2 days. Her new supervisor in Beijing had been incredibly understanding, securing a small apartment for her and expediting her paperwork. Her life, once so large and intertwined with Robert's, had been reduced to a few crates of essential items, some photographs of her parents and her son. The morning of their departure was crisp and clear. The taxi idled in the driveway. Eleanor took one last look around the empty house. She felt no nostalgia, only a profound sense of shedding a heavy, ill-fitting skin. She locked the door and didn't look back. The train journey was long, a rhythmic lullaby of wheels on tracks that soothed her frayed nerves. Daniel, fascinated by the changing scenery, babbled and pointed at rushing rivers and distant mountains. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Eleanor breathed freely. The air itself felt different, untainted by deception. Beijing was a whirlwind of noise, color, and overwhelming energy. Her new job at the research institute was challenging, pulling on intellectual muscles she had let atrophy. It was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. She found a local nanny, a kind-eyed woman named Mrs. Liang, who cared for Daniel with a gentle efficiency that put Eleanor at ease. Life was harder. There were moments of sheer panic, balancing a demanding career with single motherhood in a new city. There were lonely evenings and worried nights when Daniel was feverish. But the struggle was honest. It was hers. Her heart, though scarred, felt lighter than it had in 50 years. She was building something real on a foundation of truth. She received a letter from Aunt Agnes. The news was grim, yet delivered with a sense of grim finality. After their release, Robert and Clara had divorced almost immediately. Stripped of his career and status, Robert was a broken, bitter man. Clara, with no one left to rely on and her only child gone, had clung to him in hysterical grief, blaming him for everything. Their once secret romance had soured into a toxic public resentment. They became notorious in their small town, objects of pity and scorn. Then the fire. It had started in the middle of the night in the cheap apartment they shared. Both were found inside. The official report suggested faulty wiring, but the rumor Aunt Agnes wrote was that Clara had finally snapped, barricading them in and setting the blaze. A final, terrible act of ensuring they would be together forever, even in death. The letter also contained a sober request. Robert had left behind a small, meager savings book. His will, scribbled on a piece of notebook paper, asked that it be sent to his former wife, as they put it. The lawyer was asking if she would consider coming back to handle the burial, as neither of them had any family left who would claim their remains. Eleanor read the letter twice, then folded it neatly. She felt a quiet, distant sadness, not for Robert but for the terrible waste of it all. For the lives that could have been, had they chosen honesty over a monstrous fantasy. She thought about it for an evening, then went to the post office the next day. She wired a small sum of money to the lawyer, enough for a basic no-frills cremation and the interment of their ashes in a potter's field. She did not include a note. The money was not sent out of love or forgiveness or any sense of duty. It was the last tie she needed to sever. It was a period at the end of a long, painful sentence. The past, once an ever-present weight on her shoulders, began to feel like smoke in the wind, faded, distant, and ultimately gone. Eleanor had no desire to look back. 5 years flowed into 10. Eleanor's career at the institute flourished. Her work on agricultural sustainability earned her respect and a modest fame in her field. She had bought a small, sun-drenched apartment on the outskirts of Beijing, with a balcony that looked out over a park where willow trees dipped their branches into a lazy stream. Daniel grew from a chubby-cheeked baby into a bright, inquisitive boy. He had her thoughtful eyes and a gentle, earnest nature that was entirely his own. He knew his father was a man who had made very bad choices, and was no longer alive. Eleanor answered his questions with a simple, age-appropriate honesty, shielding him from the horrific details but never lying. She would not build her life with her son on a foundation of lies, no matter how well-intentioned. One crisp autumn afternoon, golden sunlight poured into the living room, filling it with a warm, brilliant glow. Eleanor was reviewing a paper at her desk, her reading glasses perched on her nose. Daniel, now 14, was sprawled on the rug, sketching in a notebook. A comfortable silence rested between them, broken only by the scratch of pencil on paper and the turning of pages. A gust of wind blew through the open balcony door, carrying the scent of dry leaves and distant rain. A single perfect ginkgo leaf, shaped like a tiny fan and the color of sunshine, drifted inside. It spun lazily in the air before landing softly on the page of Daniel's sketchbook. He looked up, his eyes following the leaf's path, and then pointed toward the window. "Look, Mama," he said, his voice no longer a child's but not yet a man's. "It's gold." Eleanor looked up from her work. She saw the leaf on his book. She saw the sunlight catching the dust motes in the air, turning them into a dance of diamonds. She saw her son's face, open and content, untouched by the shadows that had once darkened her world. A profound peace settled over her, so complete it was almost a physical sensation. The relentless anger that had fueled her for so long had finally burned itself out, leaving behind not ashes, but a fertile ground for a new life. She thought of Robert and Clara, not with hatred but with a distant, quiet pity. They were a tragic footnote in her history, a cautionary tale of what happened when vanity and selfishness eclipsed humanity. Their story was over, ended in fire and fear. Her story was still being written. It was here in this sun-filled room. It was in the work that challenged her mind. It was in the young man her son was becoming. A kind, smart boy who knew the value of truth because his mother had fought a war for it. She got up from her desk and walked over to him. She picked up the golden leaf from his book and twirled it by its stem. "It is gold," she said, smiling down at him. "It's perfect." She placed the leaf back in his hand and kissed the top of his head. He smiled, a little embarrassed by the affection, but he didn't pull away. Eleanor walked to the balcony and looked out at the world. The sky was a vast, endless blue. The future stretched out before her, bright and unknown and entirely her own. She had not just rewritten her story, she had reclaimed her soul. The long winter of her life was finally, undeniably, over. The